Let's go.
Let's go.
Oh, did you want to?
Sorry, I'll let you.
Next time.
I'm in love with you.
Snap out of it.
I'll have what she's having.
Too many guys think I'm a concept, or I complete them, or I'm gonna make them alive. I'm just a fucked up girl who's looking for my own peace of mind. Don't assign me yours.
Caustic wit is my religion.
I would make a great queen because I am so stubborn.
I say when it comes to stardom and Lauren, there are no accidents.
Hi, Karen Peterson.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 119 of Citizen Dame, the podcast where we are just trying to do what we can do in a lot of ways. I am Karen Peterson, joined as always by Lauren Humphreys-Brooks.
Hello.
And we have a lot of stuff that we're pretty excited to talk about today, but before we get into any of that, we have a contest winner.
Yay!
We have been running the Criterion contest, and we do have a winner. This person is going to get 3 months of the Criterion channel, and we will be sending that access code this week. So, the winner is Michelle D, who on Twitter is known as @GamecockMitch. So, congratulations, Yay! Michelle. We're very excited for you, and we'll be sending that code your way. So,
yay!
Woohoo!
So many good films to watch.
I know. You're gonna just love it. I can't wait to hear what you watch and what you think. So, alright. Well, before we get into all this many things that we have to talk about this week, Lauren, how are you?
I am alright. I am bearing up under everything, as I think many of us are just kind of going like, what should I be paying attention to? Can someone please give me a list or something? Yeah, I mean, it's been exciting. It's a bit calmer in the neighborhood this week, but it's been really exciting and very important. I'm not trying to minimize that or anything, but we've had a lot of a lot of NYPD helicopters flying over our apartment, so that's been exciting.
Yeah, we've had a lot of helicopters over my neighborhood, too. It seems like it's died down. Although yesterday one of my neighbors decided to celebrate by shooting off a shit ton of fireworks into the sky. And I don't know what that was about. That was not fun. It sounded like cannons. It was crazy.
I think it's just a thing right now, and probably we always get lots of fireworks and stuff like that in our neighborhood, just during the summer, just because it's a thing.
Yeah.
But I think because so many people are inside and there's so much energy, you can't really get together in big groups or anything like that. So I think people are just sort of doing things like that to shoot off steam and everything. It is very exciting, however, to be sitting in your apartment knowing that there are protests going on, a couple blocks away, that the cops have been, shooting people with rubber bullets, and hearing things that sound like they might be gunshots. And sitting there going were those fireworks or gunshots? And running out onto our balcony being do we see any fireworks? Yes, there are the fireworks. All right. So those were not gunshots.
By exciting, of course, you mean charged moments, not woohoo, people are getting shot.
Yes,
to clarify.
Yes, no, it's very yeah, obviously there actually was a police shooting that occurred not far from where I live, in kind of deep. It was deeper into Crown Heights. I live in Crown Heights, but we realized after the fact that we had actually heard the gunshots. So that was something. It's it's interesting around here. We also were watching Da 5 Bloods yesterday, and as we're watching these guys in the jungles of Vietnam, we're hearing firecrackers going off outside. So it was just I can't. This is a little too much right now.
Man, they're really upping the budget on those effects for these movies nowadays. They bring it right to your house.
Jeez. Yeah.
Oof.
So.
Yeah. Well, this week has been, quieter. It's been a lot quieter. It's, I mean, I I didn't go to the protests only because I didn't have anybody to go with, and it was one of those things where once the police were showing up and getting violent on people, I was like, yeah, that's not somewhere I should be without a friend. So, just because stuff was happening everywhere, and so I didn't go, but I was definitely glued to the TV, watching, donating money, like, trying to do what I could, which is not very much, and I was realizing, man, how helpless I am, but also just how uninvolved I've been for way too long. Like, so many people have been talking recently about how, like, well, it's not enough to be not racist, you have to be anti-racist, and I realize I've been firmly in the not racist camp forever, and it's time for me to actually move over and do something. So that's kind of my realization this week, but I'm still at that point where I'm figuring out what I can do in my circumstances, and I think we're all figuring that out. The important thing is to try and to see what works and see what doesn't. But yeah, actually, so this week, what we wanted to talk about is, obviously this is a film podcast, so we wanted to talk about film and how that can be an engine for social change. And there's so much to talk about in that regard. And it's interesting because just this week we had 2 pieces of news, which, you know, lately isn't very common that we get any real news out of Hollywood. But this week we had 2 things that both happened that are both really important. One was there was a big, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, I'll go with your word, kerfuffle.
I never know how to put it when you because kerfuffle seems like, oh, that's really like diminishing and things. But I was just like, but it's not like a fight. It's not really a debate. It's like it's a thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm using it to kind of diminish the people who are whining because what happened was this week HBO Max pulled Gone with the Wind from their library. And, which I wouldn't know because I still can't access HBO Max because I get HBO through my Roku and they still haven't worked their shit out. So, whatever. But anyway, so HBO Max announced that they were pulling Gone with the Wind, and a bunch of people, understandably, I guess, got mad because, I mean, after all, it is a Best Picture winner. And before knowing all the details and understanding what was really happening, it was a little bit of like, well, you guys, you can't just erase your history and pretend it never happened. And also, Hattie McDaniel won an Oscar for that, and she was, you know, that was a huge win. She was the first woman, the first Black woman to win an acting Oscar, and but then they clarified, no, we're not pulling it forever and pretending it never happened. We're going to pull it and do what Disney should be doing with more of their stuff, which is provide a contextual conversation about it and about not just how times have changed, but how the things that we used to think were fine in the past really weren't even fine then. It's not just that they're not fine now. So that's what's going to happen. It will be back at some point. But it was interesting listening to people get mad and argue about it. I don't know, Lauren, what was your experience?
I mean, it seems like Gone with the Wind is one of those films that every once in a while it comes up again, because it is sort of, it's the elephant in the room in Hollywood in a lot of ways, because it is one of the most popular films ever made. It is still spectacularly popular. A number of people, talked about, well, even if they were to pull it completely from their streaming service, there are so many anniversary editions of Gone with the Wind available on physical media. Like, it is one of the major Hollywood releases, for good and ill. Like, it's one of those things that you can't really change that, right? But it's one where this conversation tends to come up, and I remember several years ago there was a similar conversation about it, which was essentially that Lou Lamenick, who I don't think he writes for them anymore, I believe he's retired, but he used to write reviews for the New York Post, was talking about how he felt that Gone with the Wind should not be shown as entertainment anymore. It should only be shown within a historical context and only within the context of talking about its racism. And there was a huge explosion about that. Just like, well, it's one of my favorite movies, and, all of this stuff. And there's this huge argument that got going. But he was essentially saying that, no, it shouldn't be released as a piece of entertainment. You shouldn't be showing it on TCM or on streaming services, except to talk about the racism contained within it. And not just the racism. I think it's important to note that it isn't just about the racist depictions. It's also about just the depictions of the antebellum South. Mm-hmm. And the pre-Civil War South and the South during the Civil War, and the way that it valorizes the Confederacy, the way that it valorizes the KKK. People tend to forget that there's like a whole subplot in that film about one of the characters joining the KKK, and this is a film that is made in, it's 1939. So this is height of Hollywood, basically. This is height of the golden age. These are huge stars. It's Clark Gable and Vivien Leigh and Leslie Howard and Olivia de Havilland. These are major, major stars of the time and major icons. And we tend to sort of go like, well, we're not really going to talk about Gone with the Wind and everything. So I think it's such a complicated issue because it's true, you cannot erase it. You can't say it never happened. And you don't want to say that it never happened, because saying that it never happened meant that you're not dealing with the iconography of racism, that you're not dealing with the images that perpetuate racism. One of the things that Gone with the Wind has often been criticized for is that it doesn't really, it's not like Birth of a Nation in the sense that it does not represent bad Black people and good Black people. There are not bad slaves and good slaves in Gone with the Wind. There are only good slaves, right? And the representation of those slaves is pretty much they're happy, right? They're happy being slaves, and that's the critique that gets going about Gone with the Wind, is that someone, Hattie McDaniel's character Mammy, or and I can't remember the actual character name, but the woman who's played by Butterfly McQueen, they are happy working on the plantation. They are happy serving the white people, right? And that's the way that they're represented. So they're, quotation marks, positive characters, right? They're not bad characters. They're not evil. They're not trying to kill white people or anything like that. They're not treated like that. But there's this banality of it, this sense that, well, actually, in the antebellum South, all of the Black people were very happy. It's the happy slave narrative. And that's where Gone with the Wind becomes, I think that's how Gone with the Wind kind of gets away with it. We tend to look at Birth of a Nation as this, exceptionally racist film, which it is. But somehow we don't have the same attitude towards Gone with the Wind, partially because there is this, positive stereotyping of the happy slave, of the happy servant, right? The happy Black person who doesn't really want to be freed. And that's what the film kind of relies upon in terms of its representation of Black characters.
Yesterday I was watching a documentary called A Century of Black Cinema. Mm-hmm. And, well, it was funny because, I could tell it was dated. Just because of the look of it, but also when I got to the section about Bill Cosby, it was very obviously before anything happened. Then I looked and it was like, oh, okay, this is from 2003. This all makes sense. But they had a really good discussion about Gone with the Wind, and yeah, exactly that. Why it is problematic, even though, people tend to either give it a pass or say, well, but, because they're not beating their slaves and their slaves aren't trying to run away and all that. And it's just like, no, that's, okay.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's a very sort of gentle representation of that time period, which we know is not accurate. Like, right. you can't say, oh no, this is totally the way that it was. It's just like, no, it really wasn't. We know that it wasn't. We know that based upon history. And so it is this very sort of glossy romanticization of this time period and what the antebellum South actually looked like
Right.
and felt like, and what the Civil War was, you know, all of that stuff is, and that's not the sole focus of the film. The sole focus of the film is not on slavery, right? It's not on a debate about slavery. It's on like this melodrama going on with the rich white people who get sort of who get involved in the Civil War. That's the story.
Right. Yeah. The slavery and the running up to the Civil War and all that, those are like background to kind of establish who these people are and to set the scene, which, I mean, this is based on a book too, but yeah, it's not a movie about slaves. It's not a movie about keeping them or not keeping them, you know, setting them free. It's not about that at all. These are just characters that are part of Scarlett and Rhett's story. And yeah, but that's the thing. So this documentary that I watched, it's on Amazon Prime. It's for free. And it was really interesting because it got into Gone with the Wind. It got into some other films where, you know, for so long people have just kind of accepted it as like, well, this is a good representation. This is positive, and explaining why no, we need to look past what the text is showing you and really look at what's happening and what sort of effect this representation is doing for the audience. And I think that's kind of what we are talking about today with how film can be an engine or vehicle for social change, and also how it can sometimes not be.
Gone with the Wind reinforces this kind of, like we were saying, this banality, this goodness, this image of the South in that period as being, you know, basically decent, this kind of romanticized society, you know, all of that stuff. And it's a very attractive vision. You look at it and you go like, oh, this is gorgeous. You know, this is great. This is, you know, fascinating. This is like American aristocracy. It's very much like, it's in some ways, at least the representations, again, of the white people, it's very much like the representations of like the British court in the Victorian period. That's what it looks like. Yeah. Right? And so it's this vision of American aristocracy that did exist, right? But did not exist in this nice, warm, and fuzzy way because it's built on the backs of thousands upon thousands of slaves, of people being beaten and murdered, and forced and enslaved and raped and forced to work. You know, all of those things. And that's something that the film isn't interested in acknowledging and doesn't want to show us that part. Because we can't have, you know, Clark Gable beating slaves or, you know, having sex with his female slaves. We're not going to show that. We're certainly not going to talk about that, you know.
Right. Yeah. He's a man above reproach. He would never do such things. And it's like, well, actually, he totally would. But we don't want to. And it's interesting. It's like, okay, that's separating or trying to set up a vision of something, even though, like, even people who are racist, I think, understand that slavery isn't right. They just don't care necessarily if it's right or wrong. And it's interesting because when you show it in this kind of way, it looks like, well, but they're taking care of their people, and so it's fine. And like this week, there were so many discussions, renewed conversations, because like NASCAR has made a rule that you cannot display the Confederate flag anymore. Finally, it's only 2020, you know, but that happened, and then my Facebook feed, like, I have friends. This wasn't even most of the people that I'm friends and family, you know, related to, but there was a lot of conversation from certain people that I'm connected with and friends with and related to that were very upset about that, and like, oh, the Confederate flag, it's just a symbol of states' rights and blah blah blah. And I'm just like, okay, I don't know how you reconcile the fact that you like to brag about being the party of Lincoln who freed the slaves and also celebrate the Civil War as this like fun little rebellion when they lost, first of all.
No participation trophies.
Exactly. exactly. That's that same group that hates participation trophies, but they love the losers of the Civil War. Go figure. And it's so weird to me how they don't see that. And then like this week when they also announced that they'll be renaming some of the army bases that are currently named after Civil War soldiers and generals or Confederate ones, and Trump was like, no, it's a part of our great American heritage. I'm like, you want our army to have bases named after losers? I thought you hated losers. Like, yeah, we've just so glamorized and glorified the Civil War, and part of that is through things like Gone with the Wind. So I'm glad that HBO and Warner Brothers, that they're moving forward with starting to contextualize it, not hide behind it, like Disney has done with, Song of the South and stuff. Like, don't hide your history, acknowledge how you've grown.
Yeah, acknowledge it, show it, study it, talk about it. Talk about it as a racist film, not as something that we're going to passively just enjoy. Mm-hmm. And talk about what it represents. And there's been a lot of scholarship done about Gone with the Wind. And I do think it's important to note that this is not a new conversation. In the time period when the film was released, there were discussions about Gone with the Wind. There were public ones. And I'm just getting this from a Guardian article. A contemporary review in the Chicago Defender called it a weapon of terror against Black America. Dramatist and filmmaker Carlton Moss wrote that it was a nostalgic plea for sympathy for a still living cause of Southern reaction. And so this is in the 1940s, right? So these are contemporary responses. So this whole idea that like now we're suddenly reacting against it, or that this is like a new thing. No, in the 1940s, they knew. In the 1940s, they were having this conversation. They were having this debate. So I saw a number of people say that we have to remember that Gone with the Wind was also considered to be an almost progressive view of the American South in that period. That it was sort of that time period's Green Book. And that's something that we need to continue to talk about and to acknowledge, not just that, this is not looking back on 1939 and saying like, we're better than them now. It's saying like, they knew better. There was at least some awareness of what they were doing and how they were representing it. And in the midst of all of this, I think we also have to talk about the fact that, Hattie McDaniel did was the first Black woman to win an Academy Award. She won it in a segregated hotel where she was not allowed to sit with the rest of the cast. Mm-hmm. Because she was Black. And so watching, and there's a recording of her speech, and watching her, and she's overwhelmed. She's grateful for, or at least she comes off as grateful for this honor. And you understand, it's like, this is an honor. It is an honor for anyone to be awarded like that, and for her to be the first Black woman to win that award. But at the same time, it's happening in a context where she's not even being allowed to sit in the same place as her white co-stars. And I think that says a lot about the time period, and it says a lot about the complications of things like this when we actually begin talking about it.
Yeah, definitely. And it's, I think you're, I lost my point. Oh well, that's okay.
You think I'm right and everything is correct.
Yeah. But no, I mean, one of the things you just said is something that we've talked about a lot, which is that you have to understand that just because we know it's wrong now doesn't mean they didn't know it was wrong then.
Yeah.
So much of the time, that's the case. And one of the problems that we see from people is just a complete lack of knowledge about history, or a lack of respect for history. And by that, I mean just like not acknowledging that it existed. And I think that has caused so many of the problems that we still see now. I mean, the fact that we're having a conversation about race and inclusion in 2020 is, I mean, it needs to happen, but why wasn't this all resolved 50 years ago when the country was desegregated? You know, why is this still an issue now? And why are we still having these conversations? Why do we still have to have protests about, you know, standing up against police brutality? Why is this still a problem? Why, you know, and I mean, we haven't solved anything. We've made some strides since the 1960s, but people are not, you know, by and large, people are not better off now, even if some things have changed. And I mean, we saw that with what happened in Georgia this week. You know, just yesterday I rewatched Selma, which I hadn't watched since it came out. And so I had kind of not forgotten, but I just kind of hadn't thought about it in terms of like that their protest wasn't really a protest. They were showing up to register to vote and all that. And I was just thinking about that when I was watching yesterday, and those lines we saw in Georgia earlier this week of people that were not being able to access voting. And it's like, why? Why is this still happening? And I don't know. I don't know.
Well, and so in terms of that, so I was watching one of the films that is available right now on Amazon for free. Anybody, like, I don't think you even have to have a Prime account. You can just go and watch it. Is the Black Power mixtape, 1967 to 1975. And it's an interesting documentary, but it deals with kind of the Black Power movement starting in about 1967, and the various figures, the important figures of that movement, but also one of the things that it shows is the protests, right? The protests after, sometimes they turn into riots after Martin Luther King was assassinated, the death of Robert Kennedy, you know, all of those things. And watching these images from the period, you see cops throwing tear gas at protesters who are saying, you have to treat me like a person even though I'm black. Like, and watching this, it's the same thing, right? We're seeing the same thing. And the images, you're just like, okay, other than some different hairstyles, and this is being filmed on film rather than on video rather than on, you know, iPhone cameras, it's the same fucking thing, and it's being repeated over and over again. And it does kind of make you go like, why are we still having this fight? Why is this still something that this shouldn't be something that we're still doing? We should have moved beyond it by now, and yet somehow we haven't. And, you know, we're sitting here, we're two white women, right? And we're sitting here talking about this, and to a certain degree, you know, like you were saying, to a certain degree, up until this point, we've been very isolated from it. You know, I have not been targeted because of the color of my skin.
No, never.
In the United States, right? That's not something that has happened to me. And that's not something that habitually happens to me, certainly. And so there's no way that I can say, I don't know how a black person feels in the United States of America. I have no clue. Like, that's not something that I can process. So I have to look at myself and, okay, how do I try to understand my own privilege and my own, you know, racism, my own internalized racism, the things that I have sort of taken for granted as a white person, and how do I work through that and become anti-racist, become not just, I've never considered myself racist. I've always been like, no, of course I'm not racist. But like you're saying, you have to take that next step of being anti-racist and dealing with the fact that means grappling with your privilege, grappling with the racist ideas that maybe you have had that are simply part of the internalized culture of the United States. And that's very difficult to do, but it's something that we have the luxury to do as white people, because we've never had to deal with this. This is not something that we have had to think about every single day of our lives as just a fact of life. And we have to figure out ways of changing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think that's a big part of why some of this stuff hasn't changed, is because we think, oh, well, they integrated the schools, so that's done, you know? Like,
yeah,
we forget, or we just don't experience because we don't see it every day, or hardly ever sometimes. I mean, I see a lot of things just because of my work, but for a lot of people, we live in our, our very white neighborhoods, go to our very white jobs, and so we're not experiencing what other people are experiencing. We're not seeing it because we just, by the nature of different industries and different, housing developments and things like that, we don't have to confront it. And so it's easy to think that problems are solved when you don't hear about them and you aren't reminded that they're still problems.
Yeah, and I think that there is an extensive cinematic legacy of this.
Yeah.
Of this reinforcement. And one of the things that has honestly often bothered me, and I haven't really been able to articulate it until now, until recently, is that so much of the conversations, the cinematic conversations about race, take place in the past, right? So what we see are, so you talk about films like 12 Years a Slave, or even films like Selma, or films like Green Book, or the one that's been very popular on Netflix right now, The Help. Beyond all the other problems,
which is problematic, but better than Green Book.
It's true. But again, that so many of these narratives are about the past. They're about the 1960s. They're about the Civil War period or Reconstruction period. They're about something that happened once long ago. And there's a distance to them that makes us feel like, well, but things have changed now. Things are better now, right? This was, yes, we were really racist in 1965, but we're not that way anymore. And so there's a comfort to a lot of these cinematic representations that then we go so then we can turn off the movie, it makes you feel better, and you kind of go about your life of being like, man, it must have been really awful being black in 1965, but it's so nice that it's not that bad now. And it's like, okay, well, but we're not really engaging. Cinema is not directly engaging in the reality of the black experience right now. And some of that is because until fairly recently, a lot of black filmmakers have been very much shunted to the side. Have been very much treated as secondary filmmakers. And that's been true. That has been true all the way throughout Hollywood history. So now we're finally getting, and I'm not saying that this is, that we haven't had these kinds of films, but I think that the films themselves are becoming more and more mainstream, that we're actually beginning to get these perspectives because the system is beginning to break down a little bit more. It's not solely prizing this white male perspective, which means that we can't, as white people, we can't go like, oh, good, we're not racist the way that we were in 1965. We actually have to deal with our contemporary racism.
Right. Well, and that's exactly it. I mean, when you can look at, oh, well, sure, history, they always say hindsight is 20/20 because it is. It's easy to see and to say, oh, well, I know what side I would definitely be on when the Nazis were coming. I know for sure what side I would be on, leading up to the Civil War. I feel like I do, but a lot of people say that, and the reality is, if you were living in that time period, think about things like if you had a business and if you, like what are your reactions right now to what's happening? And I think that tells you a lot about which side you'd really take. Even if you saw that what was happening was wrong, would you really stand up and fight against it? Most people probably would not. Yeah. But they think that they would because looking back on it, it's so easy to see, what was clearly the right choice, what was clearly the wrong choice, and also you see which side won, and of course you're going to identify yourself with the winners and not with the losers. And I just, that's something else that I was thinking about this week, seeing some of the conversations that were happening. It's just, it's very easy to watch, watch Selma or Gone with the Wind or Glory or some of these films and say, oh, well, yeah, the world's not like that now because that's so overtly in your face of this is right and this is wrong. But seeing the subtleties now and experiencing it now is much more difficult for a lot of people. And identifying that is really hard. And when we turn to film, it's interesting because the same people who love Gone with the Wind didn't embrace something like If Beale Street Could Talk or Selma or, you know, so many other movies that, even though those are also both historically set, they're contemporary movies made by black filmmakers and not white filmmakers. And seeing those historical films told from a non-white perspective, really, really important. But so many people just go, oh, well, it's not Spielberg, I don't care. You know?
Yeah.
And it's like, but you're completely dismissing really talented filmmakers, which is, it's really a shame. And I think that luckily that's starting to shift, but it's still very slow.
Yeah.
But it'll be interesting because the other big piece of news that came out, I'd like to thank the Academy for putting this out on Friday when we're going to record this weekend, and it's like they knew what we were talking about. So the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences announced their big, they announced that they will be having an inclusion and diversity narrative, or representation and inclusion standards for Oscar eligibility. That is coming at the end of July. But what they have announced in the meantime is that they're doing what they should have been doing all along, which is expanding the Best Picture category to a very set 10 films. When they first expanded it from 5 back in 2009, it was 10 for 2 years, and then they went to this weird sliding scale because, oh, well, there's not always 10 movies that deserve it. It's like, well, there's 400 movies released every year. What do you mean there aren't 10 that deserve to be best? But whatever. Anyway, so they're going back to 10. And that will start not with this coming Oscars, because, like, not enough movies are coming out, I guess. But they're going to start that with the 94th Oscars, which are the year after. So that's good. But some of the other things that they're doing in all of this, and we'll link the news article in the show notes, but they will be having new standards for eligibility, but they won't announce that until July 30th or somewhere around there. So we don't know what that will look like, but some kind of rules regarding representation and inclusion. So that could be very interesting. I don't know if that's going to be like a certain percentage of people working on the film have to be women, people of color, black people. I'm not sure. But it's going to be really interesting to see how that changes things. And then they're also making just some other big changes, like term limits on the Board of Governors. So it used to, like, it's been all along that you could serve, I think it was 2 3-year terms consecutively, and then you have to take a year off, but you could keep doing that for life, like forever. But now you can only do that twice. So you can only serve a maximum of 12 years on the Board of Governors, which is good because when people are there too long, we see what happens, and there's just so much complacency that happens from people that are in the same position for a really long time. So, yeah, and then they're also going to be doing panels. One of the things I was really excited about was the Academy Museum, which is set to open in December. We'll see if that still holds. But they're instituting, or they just instituted an inclusion advisory committee that will have filmmakers, historians, all kinds of people involved, so that whenever the Academy is putting together exhibits and collections, they can make sure that their collections are really inclusive and they're not forgetting Alice Guy used to make movies, or they're not ignoring people that so often for so long have been overlooked and ignored. So it's to really give you a broad historical context for their different collections. So I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, I think that all of this sounds like it's a step in the right direction. It is one of those that you're a little bit like, why have we not been doing this earlier? Like that's, it's tiring. I think that everybody's very tired. But it's tiring that these kind of very seemingly basic things have not been a part of the conversation up until now. But at the same time, it's good that they're finally being part of the conversation, that they're finally moving in the correct direction.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to see that, because Cheryl Boone Isaacs was the Academy president a couple of years ago. She was 2 presidents ago, and she was awesome, and she did some really amazing things. She really moved the Academy toward this direction. She wasn't able to get some of these things done, but a big part of the reason why this is happening now is because one of the things that she pushed for was to broaden the diversity of the membership of the Academy in the first place. Because for so long it was like 75% white men, something like that. My number might be off, but and they had people that hadn't made movies for years, hadn't really worked in the industry, but they were still getting to vote, and they were still getting to vote for not just the Oscars, but who was on the board. And of course they're going to vote for their old white friends. And she just said, no, okay, we need to have some rules here. If you're in the Academy, you're an active member of the community. And also, they started inviting more people of color, more women, trying to really just broaden the scope. And so now they have over 9,000 members. I think when she started, it was around 6,000. And they only invited a couple hundred, maybe, every year. And, I think the first year that she really pushed for it was 1,500 new members, something like that. And a bunch of people were mad because of some of the names that were on the list of invitees. But it was like, no, if we're really serious about changing this industry and about really providing a voice for people, this is some of the things that you have to do. And so what's happening now is a direct result of expanding the membership. And I think it's great to see.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a good thing. Like I say, you do kind of wonder why it has taken this long, but we're getting there. I am always a little depressed that it's just like, we are going to produce inclusion, which means that percentage must be all of these groups, right?
Right. Yeah.
That are not white men, and it's like, I know that we live under patriarchy. I know that we live in a very sort of white male dominated society and everything. But after a while, I'm just like, why do white men continue to be the default? Why is this still the conversation that we're having? And yeah, it's just like, I was actually thinking the other day, I was just like, is there like a term for encompassing everyone who is not straight, white, and male? Like, can we have an acronym or something like that will just, when we're talking about, like, there are the straight white guys and then there's everybody else.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Well, and I was thinking the other day too, and I have this thought occasionally of just like, at what point did just white people in general get to be in charge? We've never been the majority race on the planet. Like, how did that even happen in the first place?
Well,
it's so stupid.
It's called colonialism, and
well, yeah.
And honestly, some of it, and if you read history, some of it is pure dumb luck. Like, some of it is just like, and some of it is weaponry, and some of it is resistance to disease. I mean, one of the reasons why white people were colonized the United States the way that they did was they were filthy, and they showed up with all of these diseases that they had developed a resistance to because they were filthy. And that the indigenous populations did not have a resistance to, and so it just swept through them and killed them. And at the same time, you're talking about people with a lot of weaponry. And so that combination of things it results in some of the colonization attitudes and everything. But yeah, it's very. Some of it is just pure dumb luck.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, big news this week about the Columbus statue, and there was a lot of debate about that. And it's like, the guy is famous because he got lost, thought he was one place and wasn't, and then he did a whole lot of bad shit. But yeah, let's keep monuments to him up. Like, all right.
I did enjoy because, our governor was like, no, it's an important part of Italian American history or something like that. And it's like, okay, first of all, there's a few things that are wrong with that. But I did love the number of people who proposed alternative statues, including Martin Scorsese's mother, Danny DeVito, who else? Mario and Luigi. Simply a statue of a slice of New York State pizza. There are like all kinds of things. Just like, look, if we're gonna all honor the contributions of Italian Americans, which we should, important contributors, we can definitely find some people that are not genocidal idiots. I'm certain that we can.
Yeah, I saw someone posted a thread on Twitter this week. I wish I knew who it was, and it will probably take me too long to find it. But someone posted a whole thread about how even in his day, people knew Columbus was a piece of shit. And so a bunch of people jumped in there and like, no, he was a celebrated explorer. It's like, are you listening to what she's saying? He was not a celebrated explorer. He had to go to how many different countries before he could even get money for his trip because nobody wanted to fund him.
Exactly. The Italian, he literally had to leave Italy in order to get funded for the trip, which he then got lost on.
Exactly. He was not a good smart person.
And he took a look at this indigenous people, just like, oh, they're India. It's just like, you didn't fucking find India, dude. It's not India. It's not India. You just stumbled across a continent that you did not know existed. That's what happened. You tripped over North America.
And you also didn't discover it if there were already people living there.
Yeah.
And that is why Columbus statues should be taken down. Anyway, but no, I think that it's interesting just to go back to our overarching topic for this episode with film and what that can do for social change and whether it can or not. I think that stuff like the story of Columbus and, colonization in general, the Pilgrims, all sorts of things have contributed to why we so easily overlook or ignore what's happening in our society or what has happened in history. Because if you see it on a movie, it's based on a true story, so most of this must be accurate, which is usually not at all the case. But it really does kind of ingrain those wrong things in your mind, and it makes it very hard to deprogram people when they've been basically taught the wrong information their whole lives. But that's where film really can help, because documentaries are really good. They're great. There are some really, really amazing ones. But I think for a lot of people, what changes them is seeing more fictional accounts and fictional narratives that can serve as either allegories or as parables that they can then use in their own lives.
Yeah.
I think that, I think both are necessary is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think that the perception of everything, we were talking about Gone with the Wind, the perception that film sells, right? The images that film sells is of happy slaves, right? Mm-hmm. And so if that's the image that you then, and it also, it's a comforting image too. It's a comforting image to the white viewer, because it says you're not, your ancestors, and I'm saying this as someone, half of my family comes from the Deep South. We were slave owners back in the day. Half of them fought for the Confederacy, all of that stuff. It's a very comforting image if me as a white viewer, I get to sit down and watch oh, actually the slaves weren't unhappy. Like, they were happy people. Like, we treated them nicely, you know, all of that stuff. That's a really comforting image, and that means that you don't have to grapple with the issues that the reality of those narratives. And so that's why it is important then to turn around and to have films that depict the reality, or that try to like actually say, no, this was not the truth. This is not the reality of the way that people experience that. And I think that you're right. It's true stories are helpful, and you know, you get fictionalized true stories, very often ones that are sanitized. Mm-hmm. But then also fiction itself can kind of open the way a little bit. It can broaden the scope of the way that we understand race or gender or sexuality or anything like that. That, you know, if we're constantly pushing back against some of the stereotypes and some of the reinforced images of Black people or of women or of gay people, and those films sort of allow you to take a different perspective and to recognize both the reality of it, but then also within a fictional narrative, and like you say, in almost a parabolic narrative. But it's important, I think, again, as white people, that we experience these things, and it's very important. One of the criticisms that we often hear about Spike Lee is that many of his films, and this is particularly in terms of some of his more recent films like BlacKkKlansman, seem to be speaking to a white audience. And I think I think that, you know, that I wouldn't downplay that criticism. I certainly don't think that all films should be speaking to a white audience or anything like that. But I do find it interesting that those films are treated that way, and that there's an important, I think, thing that's happening right there. Because, at least for me, and again, I'm talking as a white viewer, so I completely understand that mine is not the sole perspective. But one of the things that I like about Spike Lee's films is that his work does force me personally to interrogate my whiteness. And that is and I don't believe that all filmmakers should be doing that. I don't believe that it's the job of a Black filmmaker to make me interrogate my whiteness. But one of the things that I appreciate about that is that it forces me to come to terms with certain things that maybe I don't want to note, or I don't want to think about, or I don't want to talk about. But in watching his films, I'm like, this is something I need to talk about. This is something I need to consider within myself. And that was especially true of BlacKkKlansman. It was also true, one of his best films, I think, and it's a film that was very controversial when it came out, was Bamboozled, which is specifically about the representations of Black people in media, and it ends with this extensive kind of compilation of representations of Black people from films in the 1930s and 40s, and it's shocking. It's shocking to watch it all kind of put together, and to really note how incredibly racist some of these films were, and how this is the basis of American cinema, and that's important, you know, to think about and to talk about.
Yeah. I remember a few years ago, this was during the first season of Glee, so it was before Glee just became terrible, when it was still mildly watchable. But anyway, but this part was important because I was listening to an interview with one of the characters, one of the actors, and he was talking about how they very deliberately were establishing things like having a prominent gay character who was in high school and letting him explore relationships, having two dads, you know, these kinds of things. And that part of a big part of why they were just being so upfront about it was because the more people could just see that, the more it would become normal. And this was all happening around the time of Prop 8 in California, and a lot of conversations about legalizing gay marriage and just, you know, rights for homosexual people in the first place. And yeah, so it was interesting to hear him talk about that, and just that you can use entertainment to of course, some people read it wrong and say, oh, that's indoctrination. But no, it's actually more like deprogramming. This becomes normal because it is normal. And I think that film really can do that. The more that we're exposed to different cultures and different ways of looking at the world through filmmakers like Spike Lee, who really just put it in your face and don't let you escape from your own biases, I think that the more that we expose ourselves to that, the more open we become to understanding that our perspective not only is not the only right one or the only one, but is a very, very small one in the greater scheme of things and in the greater picture. So I think that that's where film can really help people to open up their minds and open up their way of thinking. And I think that that's why it's so important that we have so much diversity with filmmakers. And there are a lot of Spike Lee films. Well, actually there are a lot that I've never seen, but there are some that I don't personally care for, but that's fine. I don't have to like them, but the way that they challenge my thinking is what's really important. Yeah. And that's why I choose to watch them and seek them out. And I think that it's interesting people's reactions to filmmakers like him who are, you know, a little bit like, I wouldn't even say he's controversial. To some people he is. He just has a very direct in your face approach, and that puts people off. But I think it's if you're one of the people that aren't put off by it, then I think that is a good step in the right direction.
Yeah, there's a sense in which there's definitely certain films that are there to make you feel uncomfortable, and to make you question your perspective and your position, and that's important. And that's, I think, one of the things that we keep on saying on this podcast is watch a lot of film, and what that means is not just, you know, sit down and kind of watch the quotation marks classics and everything, but to actually watch a lot of different filmmakers and a lot of different kinds of filmmakers. So white people and black people and Chinese Americans and Chinese filmmakers and Korean filmmakers and, you know, indigenous filmmakers, you know, all of this kind of broad scope. So and then you're getting to see the world that is not solely through one perspective. And some of those are going to be good films. Some of them will be bad ones. Some of them will be ones that make you uncomfortable. But it's important to have those experiences and to say, you know, it's important for me to try to empathize and understand that film is showing me one perspective, and that in order to really comprehend the existence of humanity, right, it's important to consume all kinds of art as much as possible.
Yeah, I think I've talked about this before, and I grew up in a very conservative household. I was very conservative in a lot of ways, moderate in mostly social, but it's interesting because so much of what I used to think and so much of how I used to view the world really changed when I started to travel. And I've been to Europe, I've been to France and England, but I've also been to South America. I went and built a house with Habitat for Humanity in Paraguay. I went and spent a month volunteering with a children's youth organization in Honduras. I took a trip to India and Nepal a few years ago, and I have been very blessed in my life that I have the means to be able to do that kind of thing. What that does when you travel internationally and not just to the big fun touristy places like the Eiffel Tower, but when you go and you're walking through the streets of Delhi and seeing real, true poverty that we do not have in this country, and when you're building a house for someone who's literally been living in a car, and when you're having those experiences, it really does open up your mind to a completely different set of or different knowledge, different understanding of the world. And And so many of the things that I grew up believing, because that's what I was taught by my family, by, teachers, stuff like that, I realized was not right. And that I had been raised with such a limited perspective of the world. And like I said, most people don't have the opportunity to travel like that. And most people just don't want to travel like that. It's very uncomfortable to go to some of the places that I've been. But that's where, for people who don't have that chance, that's where film can really help in similar ways. And when you're watching films, like you said, from Korean directors, from indigenous directors, and all types of films, not just documentaries, but, we watched and loved a movie about Nazis from a Maori Jew from New Zealand, and it's, yeah. And that's the thing, but when you watch these films from different filmmakers that don't look like you, it really can help break down some of those wrong things that we've been taught, and some of those things that we always thought we understood but really didn't. And that's where film is so important, to not just helping us understand the culture, but helping us change the culture.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but speaking of Spike Lee, he had a new movie out this week. And the timing on this is really interesting, especially with the way that it begins and ends, I thought, because this was scheduled way before George Floyd was murdered. This was scheduled before Breonna Taylor was murdered. This is before the recent protests started up anew. This movie has been scheduled for June 12th release, and that is, of course, Spike Lee's Da 5 Bloods on Netflix. And Lauren, why don't you start off with your thoughts?
I mean, I think once again we're going to preface this with, we're white people.
Yes, we are very, very white. I am Irish and Swedish. You don't get much whiter than me.
That is very white. Wow.
Yes.
So we're very white people. So I don't want to try to say what this means, or, that this is an urgent film or anything like that. I think that, first of all, it's just a well-made film. It's well put together. It's well constructed. The basic plot is, it's about 4 Vietnam War vets who return to Vietnam, and their goal is they want to go back into the jungle where they were engaged in a firefight, and where one of their number was killed, and now is buried, and they're also looking for a cache of gold that they left there. So I described this on Twitter as kind of like if Apocalypse Now met the Treasure of the Sierra Madre, and decided that we need to talk about black men being used as cannon fodder by the military-industrial complex. That's kind of the film. And it is very referential. There are a lot of references to Vietnam War movies. There's even... And they're very explicit references, too. He's not trying to conceal anything. However, props to Spike Lee for being possibly the first filmmaker to make a Vietnam War movie and not include Creedence Clearwater Revival's Run Through the Jungle. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Love this song, definitely overused. But so this is a film that is about camaraderie. It is about the relationship between this group of black men, but it's also about trauma. It's about generational trauma, and it's about the fact that these were soldiers who were sent into this war zone in order to fight for a country that was still denying them many basic human rights. And the film explores that tension, and that the reaction to it, and the reaction to trauma, and specifically to the trauma of not just being a vet, but being a black vet. And I think that it's a spectacular film. It's very well made. Delroy Lindo is, I think that he's getting much deserved praise across the board, because he really does anchor it. and gives such a wonderful performance. And it's complicated. It isn't a straightforward narrative. It isn't, it isn't straightforward whose side you're really supposed to be on, which I think is also important. My major critique of it is that I think that it's a little top heavy in the sense that it takes a long time to set up the characters and to set up kind of the going into the jungle. And as soon as they get into the jungle, then I think the film picks up speed and more deeply engages with its own subject matter. And so my one thing is that I think that maybe the first act could have been cut down a little bit. And we didn't maybe need to spend as much time on the conversations there as in some of the things that happen later on in the film. Otherwise, it really is a spectacular film, and very moving and funny. There is some humor in it, and very much engaged with its topic and with its cinematic history, with the cinematic history of films like this, of this, like I say, Apocalypse Now meets Treasure of the Sierra Madre.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I was watching it, because I knew it was a Vietnam War movie, and, but I didn't know how it was going to be done. I didn't watch a trailer. When there's movies that I know I'm going to watch, I tend to just kind of like, okay, well, I'll just wait until I get to experience it. So I don't read the synopsis or watch the trailers usually. And this was one of those. So I didn't know what I was getting into. And I thought it was going to be an actual, like, in the Vietnam era. I didn't know it was a current modern film that included flashbacks to the war. And I thought that was really, I was actually very interested in that. I thought it was a very good perspective because, like you say, we don't, I mean, so many films that include Vietnam War veterans, they're all white. Mm-hmm. I rarely see, in fact, I can't, off the top of my head right now, I cannot think of a single example of a film where I've seen, old war buddies talking about Vietnam and any of them were black. Mm-hmm. And seeing that perspective was interesting for two reasons. One, it shows that their trauma is similar to the trauma that white soldiers went through, which means, oh, gee, people are, not that different from each other. But then also it does get into why some of their experiences were so much different because of the fact that they were black. And I think that having that perspective and seeing that, getting that lesson was really valuable too for me. And plus they're just fun old guys. I would love to sit and listen to them tell stories, like they're just, I really liked the casting. I thought it was great. I loved the way that they did the flashbacks, the way that was handled with people still playing their younger versions, like mm-hmm. it was cool, very cool the way that they did that. And I really liked the camaraderie between all the men. I agree with you that it's top heavy, that it does take a bit, but I so much enjoyed getting to know them that it didn't bother mm-hmm. me. I thought it was like, oh, but they're just fun, And I also thought it was interesting how they had to confront some of their own biases. Like there's a scene in the beginning where they're in a bar and they see some Vietnamese men and they're making judgments about them until they find out what's really going on there. And I thought, oh, that's an interesting perspective too. So yeah, I agree with you 100%. This is so well made. This may be one of Spike Lee's very best films. It's hard to make a pronouncement like that when I've only seen it once and it was yesterday, but so it's like recency bias is definitely there, but this is so well crafted, so well performed, very well written, and it really does introduce us to perspectives that have not been seen nearly enough on film. And yeah, I really liked this movie. I'm gonna watch it again. it's difficult. It's not like, oh, it's a happy movie about these Vietnam vets. I mean, there are shades of that, throughout, but it's really dramatic, and it really makes you think. And yeah, I can't recommend it enough. I really can't.
Absolutely.
So, any other final thoughts?
Not really. Yet again, as we keep on repeating ourselves on this podcast, watch a bunch of movies. And I, there's been a lot of talk now, just like, okay, this is an ongoing process, right? Educating yourself and becoming anti-racist as white people, or as just generally as not Black people, is an ongoing process. It's not something you can do in a week. It's not something that is just going to, it shouldn't be a trending topic that then, moves on at some point. But there are so many great films by Black filmmakers about Black people that it's very important to kind of seek those out and to try to actually think about the world in a different perspective, and to understand it. And, you don't necessarily have to like everything that you see, but even if you don't like it, maybe try to consider why it might be important. And why don't you like it? Is it because it's not a well-made film, or is there something else at play here? And then also just to do your best to shut up and listen when you can.
Right. Yeah. We have to shut up and listen to other people, and not just like let them talk, actually listen to what they're saying, and then use that to help educate some of the people around you. And I mean, don't fight with your racist uncle. That's not going to get you anywhere. But there are other people who are kind of teetering, and they don't understand some of the problems, but they're open to it. Like, those are the people that you can reach out to and talk to. And that's how we're going to band together and make real lasting change. And, some of the companies have films that you can watch for free right now, and they've curated collections. Criterion Channel has some films in front of their paywall. Amazon Prime does too, where you can watch that are films from Black filmmakers, really important stuff that, yeah, like Lauren said, you don't have to like everything. You don't have to like any of it, but educate yourself. There are lots of things I learned in school that I didn't like, but it was still good. It's good for you. But there are really great films there to watch. Netflix also has a Black Lives Matter collection. Just go through and just experience these perspectives and challenge your thinking and share them with other people. Yep. So, yeah. All right. Well, I think that's going to wrap things up for this week. We've talked a lot, and we hope that you found something valuable. Yeah, if you have some recommendations of films, that would be great. We'd love to hear them. And I wish I had prepared ahead of time, because I would have probably made some recommendations. I mean, watch Selma, watch Malcolm X, watch, some of those big ones. There are people who just haven't seen them, and they're available right now. But then there's also other lesser known things too that you can just kind of discover. Just flip the wheel, just kind of scroll through and land on something and just watch it. Don't worry about what it is or who it's by. Just check it out and watch it. It can be a really interesting experience to do that. Do you have any recommendations?
I mean, I keep on repeating this so many different times. I've repeated it to so many different people. Please go onto the Criterion Collection and look at the Pioneers Black or African American filmmakers collection, because there's so many interesting films there. Many of them, yes, some of them are fragments and things like that. I was really disappointed. There was a great film by Oscar Michaud on there called The Symbol of the Unconquered, which is a really well-made film and everything, but unfortunately the climax is missing. There is no, what you get is this insert card, but apparently the climax involved a black man annihilating the KKK with bricks, and I was like, how dare you? How dare you
I need
lose?
to see that.
How dare you lose this section of the film? But the film is very, very good. Otherwise, even without that, but it would have been really nice to have that. But seriously, there's so many interesting films that are up there, and it's, again, I think it's always interesting to look at Hollywood history and recognize the fact that there are a lot of films that were made with primarily black casts. And that were actually being made in order to appeal to black audiences. And these were very often very low budgeted films, but some of them are amazing. And you're talking about filmmakers that really don't get their due and don't get spoken of in the same breath as some of the classic filmmakers. But they deserve to be watched, and many of them are available right now. Watch Charles Burnett's films, who's a much later filmmaker, but a number of his films. Watch The Watermelon Woman by Cheryl Dunye, which I finally got to see. I've not seen it for ages, and then I was like, you know what, this is a major blind spot for me. I need to sit down and watch it. And so yeah, just kind of watch around and see what looks interesting. If it's like, oh, this is a movie about a jazz drummer, okay, fine, watch a movie about a jazz drummer, and this sounds cool. And I don't think that it's necessarily simply engaging with, quotation marks, important films. It's engaging with films that are different from the kinds of films you tend to watch. Films that maybe are representing a different kind of life and a different perspective than you're used to. And that can just be a movie about, two people falling in love and getting married. That's fine. It doesn't necessarily have to be an important film about, an important event. But it's important to engage with all of those things.
Absolutely. So, all right. Well, thank you so much for listening, and thank you, Lauren, for being here, as always. If you'd like to continue the conversation, and we hope you will, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Citizen Dame Pod. On Facebook, we're there occasionally, once in a while. It's facebook.com/Citizen Dame. You can email us, citizendamepod@gmail.com, and you can find us on our website, citizendamepod.com. Super clever here. If you would like to kick us some money, we've got our Ko-Fi account, ko-fi.com/citizendame, and our Patreon. You can sign up and support the show. That is patreon.com/citizendame. Of course, with in general, we don't expect anyone to pay to listen to us, but we also especially understand that times are hard for people right now, and so we don't expect anything from anybody, but we do really appreciate the people that contribute and help keep things going. And that includes Heather, Adriana, the Crooked Table Podcast, Michael, James, Katie, Carriotta, Mason, Matthew, Monty, Nanina, Nicole, Robert, Sharon, Steve, Tao, and Will. Thank you all so much. We do have our Zazzle Store, zazzle.com/CitizenDame. I know I promised that there would be Citizen Dame masks in the store. That's going to happen today. Well, by the time you're listening to this, they're already there. So, sorry that took a little bit longer than I meant, but they're there. Just in time for my county to say you don't have to wear them anymore, but whatever, it's fine.
But you do. You do.
But yes, don't listen to a bunch of elected officials who bow to peer pressure from the community. Wear your masks and get them from Citizen Dame. So, also, you can talk to us individually. Lauren, where are you?
I am at LH Business.
And I am at Karen M. Peterson. Thank y'all so much for listening, and have a good week.
Bye.
Black GI. In Memphis, Tennessee, a white man assassinated Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. King also opposed the U.S. war in Vietnam. Black GI, your government sent 600,000 troops to crush the rebellion. Your soul sister and soul brothers are enraged in over 122 cities. They kill them while you fight against us, so far away from where you are needed.